because IQI cares.
I think there are 3 rights in IQI. The system is right, the culture is right, and the people is right.
It allowed me to learn, to change, and to grow.
I want to increase quality in my life, improve my personal knowledge, in a different area, and most important, I want to achieve people to find their own dream.
Joining IQI is like joining a family. We work as a team.
International company with local expertise knowledge, personal and career development, and of course, generous commission as well.
Because IQI is a global company, often we're actually learning a lot of different projects, not just in Australia and across the globe.
Job satisfaction. The satisfaction from the job is the appreciation from the client, which you will never see from your boss or from your other colleague. But I found this is true.
IQI broadens my horizon, deepens my knowledge, heightens my experience.
Join IQI, enrich your life.
I see IQI as opportunity, commitment, success.
It's the vision, changing life and realizing dream.
Happy 3rd birthday.
Happy 3rd year anniversary IQI Australia.
Happy 3rd year anniversary!
Happy 3rd year anniversary IQI Australia.
Happy 3rd year anniversary.
Happy 3rd year anniversary IQI Australia.
Happy 3rd year anniversary.
Happy 3rd year anniversary.
Happy 3rd year anniversary!
Happy 3rd year anniversary.
澳洲 IQI 3週年紀念快樂！
Australia. Happy 3rd year anniversary. Happy birthday, IQI. Happy 3rd year anniversary. Happy anniversary.
Many of us have bought a property in our life, but do we really know and understand what is actually happening behind the scene? Like, do we know what our settlement agent is actually doing to actually help us to achieve that exciting stage of your property purchasing journey, which is settlement? Welcome to IQI Australia Friday Prop Talk. My name is Leanne and your host this evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, IQI stands for International Quality Investment. As the name suggested, we are a global property advisory firm. We work collaboratively and crossing border and market our property not only to, but also from our other IQI countries like Canada, Vietnam, Dubai, Thailand, and many more. So it's truly a cross-border global firm. And IQI Australia, we are specialized in project marketing, off the plan project marketing, as well as brand new house and land packages. And of course, we also help our buyers to market their property when they're ready to move on to the next stage. All right, this evening, we would like to discuss one of the key process in your property purchase journey, which is the settlement. And joining me this evening is Gabriel Wong from Tang Law. Gabriel is a legal practice director at Tang Law. He has over 20 years of experience and he has extensive knowledge in advising clients in relation to property, general commercial, trust, and wills, and of course, estate matters. Now, join me. Welcome, Gabriel Wong.
Hi, Leanne.
Gabriel. Thank you for
Hi,
joining
Leanne.
us.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Got a mouthful today. Have struggled a little bit. Yeah, rushing around to get to the Friday Prop Talk. Anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening and talk to our audience about settlement. Yeah. Now, before I go on, is there anything that you would like to add on, or just give us a quick or brief introduction about yourself as well as the company Tang Law?
Sure. So obviously you've introduced me, and yes, I've been practicing for over 20 years in Western Australia. Most of my career has been involved in real estate, property law, commercial transaction, wills and estates. So definitely happy to talk about settlements today. And obviously it's the pointy end before, the client either sells their property or finally they get to move into the property. It's the last step in the process.
Which is the very important step as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think most buyers are definitely happy to finish that last step, and sellers are definitely happy to get the sale price that they have agreed to. So yeah, I definitely think it's an important step.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. So like how I mentioned before, I know many of us actually bought a property, but we never really actually quite understand I do, a lot of our audience do not really understand what is the whole process or how much the settlement agent actually involved in this whole process. Like in terms of things that a settlement agent have to do or get involved in. Do you mind just give us a rough idea in terms of the process, like what does a settlement agent actually do in this whole process?
Of course. So I'll start this off by saying what we're going to talk about today is obviously information of a general nature. If you do require specific advice, you should see a lawyer or settlement, or you should see a lawyer to get legal advice. But in relation to settlements, you can definitely speak to a settlement agent. And in relation to your question, what do they do? How does the settlement process work? Well, basically the settlement process at its very simplest is the process to get the title of the property from the seller's name into the buyer's name. So obviously there's a few steps involved in doing that, but that's really the process behind settlement. So once the sale has there's been an offer and acceptance, there's a time period between that and when the title gets into your name and the buyer becomes the owner. So the settlement process is that bit sort of in between, hey, I've sold my house, and to the point where someone else can move into the house. So really that's the settlement process.
Like, say, for example, I know even in the sales and purchase contract, we were trying to ready to have the agency, like the settlement agent name already down, like they already nominate someone to represent them. And so the process starts very early on, isn't it? Like you would do the title search, like what you said, and what are the things that an settlement agent will actually look at to make sure that when you actually purchase that property, it's not really rigid. What is the word? That is actually what you're buying. So other than just checking the title search, anything else that will?
there's probably quite a few steps that they will actually go through. So most of the time, settlement agent will do a search, and to make sure that's the property you think you have bought, just confirm the title details. They will also check other special conditions in the contract, such as finance approval or some type of inspections, and just go through those with if you're the buyer, they go through with the buyer and just say, hey, there are these things in your contract and you have to satisfy them by a certain date. You also have to liaise with your bank. If you're borrowing money, make sure you've started the loan process, because there's probably a period, if you require finance, that's got to be achieved. Then from there will be certain steps they will need to obviously get parties to sign certain documents so they can actually go through settlement, liaise with the other party's settlement agent, often liaise with the real estate agent, and also keep their client informed of what is going on until the date when settlement occurs. So hopefully all those things have been checked off, and if everything's fine, then you can proceed to settlement, and all going well, settlement takes place. Seller gets their money, buyer gets the title,
and the agent gets paid.
You get paid. Real estate agent gets paid. That's vitally important. The commission has to get paid, and then once that process has actually happened, those documents, from the buyer's point of view, documents we lodge at the land titles office, so it can be processed, and the title can actually be changed from the seller's name to the buyer's name. And once that's happened, that's really the settlement process. And the buyer can then ask the real estate agent for the keys and hopefully move in.
Nice.
That will be the process.
That would be the best part, isn't it? Yeah.
Of course.
For example, when they did the title search, and then there's some, special encumbrance or anything's on the title, at that point, can the buyer actually terminate the contract, or this is a little bit probably,
Okay. Yep, sure.
On the legal side of things already, but
once the title, so ideally, at the point where the contract is actually entered into, the encumbrances are the notifications or items shown on a title, such as a mortgage or a caveat or some other item that shows that the title is not completely clear. So if there's any of those things, under the joint form of general conditions, which is part of the contract, most of those things will be removed or required to be removed by the seller at settlement, unless they are what are known as specified encumbrances. Those are encumbrances which will stay on the title. So some will not come off. Common ones are easements, which are often seen for rights of way, power easements, or water court easements, or gas. So something that allows an authority to access your land. Those will often stay there, and they could affect what you can do with the land. So it's important to check those out, even at the contract stage, if possible.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. So usually those will be disclosed at the contract before contract sign, or if not, then best to ask for that sort of information before the buyer enter into the contract, isn't it? Because once you sign it, it's pretty much it's formalized. Yeah.
Yes, correct. So part of it is, the homework from a buyer's point of view. Hey, what am I going to use this property for? If I'm going to live in it, sometimes there's certain encumbrances which you won't get out of because they do not affect your use of the land. But if I'm buying an old house and I want to knock it down, then what I build on it might be critical to know what the encumbrances are. So I know where I can potentially build. So doing your homework is obviously important, even if it's just a title search. And most real estate agents do provide a copy of that search as part of the information they give to prospective buyers quite often. So they can get an idea. But I guess from a buyer's point of view, you have to know what you're looking for when you look at that title. If you have no idea what that means, you probably need to get advice from somebody.
Yeah. Very good advice, Gabriel. Yeah, it's so important to do your own due diligence these days, even though sometimes information is provided, but like what you say, you need to understand what you want to do with that piece of property or land that you're buying, and make that right decision. Yeah, and then come to buying apartment, I think there is lots more searches to do, isn't it? Because then you have a third party involved, or even just a house and land in an estate that come with a strata title. So there's extra thing that as a settlement agent you need to go through.
So some of those, so if you're buying strata type property, there's further disclosure that the seller has to give to the buyer, and the buyer should read through those carefully because they can affect the use that you can put the property to. Apartment buildings, some have certain rules as to what you can do with that apartment. You might be not allowed to have short stay accommodation. You might not be allowed pets. There's all sorts of things that can be put in what they call strata bylaws, which are the rules which govern how that strata operates. So, it's an additional step or further investigation may be required. And if you can read it and it all makes sense to you, then maybe no problem. They do become, in some cases, fairly thick documents, which do take some time to read.
Yeah, but they usually are very fair term that being put into those strata bylaw anyhow, isn't it? And those will be actually come under part of the buyer due diligence process that they need to understand what they're doing. It's not something the settlement agent has to interpret the whole contract to you, right?
Correct.
But
the settlement agent probably won't. The settlement agent doesn't need to look at it as long as you've been provided with those, because the contract's already been entered into. So if you didn't look at that when it was provided to you before entering the contract, it may well be too late. You might find out, hey, I didn't want my apartment to do this, but I didn't read through the due diligence. By the time it gets to the settlement agent, you've already signed the contract. So it may be too late to pull out. Then you have to decide what you're going to do next. Settlement agent probably can't tell you a lot because their job, as we started off with, is to get the title transferred into your name. And if they're the buyer's settlement agent, if they're the seller's settlement agent, their job is to make sure that the title can be transferred to the buyer. So by the time it gets to the settlement agent, the deal is actually done. So you sort of have to do your due diligence one step before that the offer is made.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's why it's good to clarify that what is the role of the settlement agent, and also that part is as a buyer. I mean, usually as a sales agent, we do provide that information before they enter into the contract, and also we always advise them if they need to have someone to explain the full contract to them. They should seek a legal advice, like talking to yourself, the legal team, to go through the whole, the contract. But as I mentioned before, usually these bylaw, they are highly regulated. There won't be any, condition or term that is unfair to the user or the buyers. It just they have to make sure that the whole building is working in harmony. Yeah, so good to know. Sorry.
I was just going to say that bylaw doesn't just affect one owner; it affects all the owners in that complex. So it's not directed just to one person. Those bylaws are governing everybody in that complex or that set of apartments or whatever it might be. So it's not just one person that's affected. Everyone else is governed by those same bylaws. You just got to make sure that you're comfortable with it because, for example, some may have a swimming pool and they might have a certain time where you're allowed to use the facilities. You can't just use them whenever you want. So you might want to check that. If that's important to you, you should check that out.
Yeah, it usually will be like a minor thing, isn't it? Yeah. So
Yeah,
talking about,
Yeah,
sorry, you kind of break up a little bit just then. What did you
oh,
say?
I just said, no, happy to move on if there's a different question we want to cover.
Oh, I got plenty of questions for you this evening.
No problem.
So, talking about that whole settlement process, the agent actually do quite a lot, the settlement agent. So can a buyer actually choose to, settle the property themselves without using a settlement agent in WA?
Yes, they can. So if we're talking about a buyer or a seller, either party can represent themselves. Now, some people do, and they can do it very well. Other people will find the process completely bewildering and will want someone to help them through that process because it's time regulated, because there'll be a time limit when settlements to take place. And if you miss out steps, that could delay settlement. It could cause you other problems. So, I find not a lot of people do their own settlement, but there's no restriction on doing so. Some people use settlement agents, some people use lawyers. Otherwise, they might do it themselves. Doing it yourself does come with an issue these days, which I think we'll probably be talking about later, which will relate to paper-based settlements and electronic settlements. So that is something we might touch on. I'm sure we will later.
Yes, we will. Yeah, actually. Yeah. So like what you said, it's a highly regulated sort of like situation, and there's so many updates as well. If you're not actually in that field, try to understand the whole settlement process and doing the right thing. Make sure we fill all the right form of everything. It's challenging. So I guess it's really wise to, involve or engage a settlement agent to do that work for you as a buyer. And I guess people choose to do it because they want to save on the fees. When we look at it, it's actually not that huge chunk of the fee when you're thinking about the whole process for settlement. So come down to the fee, Gabriel. I always get asked by people, how much would it cost me to engage a settlement agent? Do you mind just go in or elaborate a little bit on that? Like in terms of the fee? I know there's a huge variance. And so I guess what you go.
No, finish your sentence. Sorry to cut you off.
What I'm trying to say is I know there is few different fees. There's like the professional service fee that you charge and all the other disbursement, which is something that not within your control. So I guess that will be the question that people do not sort of understand or aware of. Yeah.
Okay. So the settlement agent's fee is, in my view, once upon a time it was a scale fee. There was a government scale, and it said, if your property sells for X dollars, Y dollars is the settlement agent's fee, so their professional fee. And that was a sliding scale depending on the value of the property. So that was deregulated probably about 10 years ago, if not longer. And now it's just set by market rate. So it could be a couple of $100, it could be a couple of $1,000, depending on who you talk to. And I think they will make a decision based on complexity, value of the property, and just the state of the market. So obviously you can choose the cheapest one you want to, or find the cheapest one, but I don't know what type of service is included for that cheapest one.
Totally.
Sometimes it's, you get what you pay for.
You get free lunch. You get what you pay for. Yeah.
So if you're getting it very cheap, it might not cover all the things you want them. It might be literally, hey, we're just transferring the land. We'll tell you the dates, but we're just transferring the land from A to B, and we're not doing anything beyond that. And they may say, look, this is the fee, but if you want us to do those other things, we're doing it at this rate, which could end up more than someone that says, I'm doing it for this price, and it includes all those things. So you need to be careful when engaging the settlement agent or the lawyer to see what the scope of work you're asking them to cover is. In relation to the other part, so that's the settlement agent's professional fee. The other parts that you have to pay for in the settlement are there's what's called an electronic advice of sale. So inquiries have to be made with local government to see what local government rates might be payable on that property, water rates, whether there's any outstanding water rates, if there's any outstanding potentially land tax issues. So those are paid for. They're usually in the hundreds of dollars. The main, I guess, disbursement people need to be wary of if they're not familiar in Australia. We charge, in WA it's called transfer duty. In other places it's called stamp duty. That's probably the biggest cost, and that's probably about 5% of the purchase price. So that can be a shock to some people, but there's no real way of getting around having to pay transfer duty. The government wants its cut from real estate transactions, and that's what the cost of acquiring that property will be. It will be part of the cost of acquiring the property. There's other sort of costs, which are the transfer of land costs, which are imposed by the Land Titles Office, which is called Landgate in Western Australia. But they're, again, in the hundreds of dollars. They're not the main one. The main one is transfer duty. That's the biggest ticket item when buying a house.
Good to clarify that. Otherwise, when they got the bill, they thought you charged so much. But like what you say, important to find out what service you're getting. And a lot of the time, like Tang Law, you have your legal team there. Sometimes if they do need additional services from the legal team, that will be a separate charges. It's not part of the settlement agent. Am I right?
That's right. So we didn't cover this before, but basically the settlement agent can help with settlement, the transactional part of it. But if something goes wrong in that transaction, a settlement agent can't give legal advice. If you use a lawyer to conduct your settlement, then they can, most of the time, depending on what they wish, what you've engaged them to do, also give you legal advice or legal representation to deal with issues that can arise in settlement, which are contractual issues. So actual problems with the contract.
Correct.
For example, someone wants to pull out or doesn't want to go through with the contract. You might need legal advice to resolve that issue rather than just the transacting the sale.
So that is also another beauty of engaging people like yourself, like the Tang Law, because you have both the legal team and the settlement agent in the same office working together. So much easier in terms of information sharing or, just giving that advice. Because I do know there are settlement agents out there that haven't got that legal backup. So therefore, maybe, in terms of, what you need. Now, what about if the buyer come from another state in Australia, for example, Sydney, Melbourne, if they bought a property in Perth, can they use their settlement agent in Melbourne or Sydney, or they have to engage someone here?
One of the things in Australia is that, same for real estate agents, every state has a slightly different way of doing things. So in WA, most settlement agents will only deal with properties in WA, same as in New South Wales or Victoria. They have certain requirements and certain steps and certain processes that they use, which we may not necessarily have an identical or similar requirement. So generally, I find that it doesn't happen a lot. Potentially, if they engaged a settlement agent in Victoria, for example, that agent may actually engage an agent in WA on their behalf to deal with the issue. If not, they may say, you need to find an agent in WA to assist you with the settlement.
So might as well just engage someone locally. So I guess the next big one is foreign buyers. So when we have a foreign investor or buyers that purchasing property in WA specifically, is there any additional or things that they have to do differently compared to the local buyers?
Yes, if they're completely foreign, so they're not they're not a citizen, they're not a permanent resident, they're not even a temporary resident, they will need Foreign Investment Review Board approval. So people often hear the term FIRB approval. You definitely need that. There are serious consequences if you don't. You can be fined. The property, they can force you to sell the property. So that it can cause a big problem if you don't get Foreign Investment Review Board approval. That needs to be a condition in the contract. We've seen a situation previously where foreign buyer didn't get, it wasn't stated in the contract as a condition. They then applied for Foreign Investment Review Board approval. They got the approval. The settlement went through. Several months later, they were asked to provide a copy of the contract. And when they found that it didn't have approval, they were penalised for it. So it can be quite severe. Like you can be fined for it, and you can be forced to sell that property which you've bought. So, and I don't think the FIRB is too concerned whether you make a profit or loss on that sale once they've told you to sell it. So, I think it's important to make sure you cover that step off.
Yeah, definitely. And I know since 2019, I think it's 2019, they actually introduced this new form. Maybe it's earlier or a little bit later. The Foreign Transfer Duty Declaration is part of the form that everyone needs to sign before, not before, like just before enter into the settlement process to declare that, So local people have to do the form as well, right?
Correct. So with local people, they're saying that they're not foreign, and everyone else is saying that they are foreign. And if you do sign that, if you are foreign, there's potentially additional transfer duty that's payable. I think off the top of my head at the moment, that's 7% on top of the transfer duty. So for foreign buyers, there is a cost of them acquiring land in Australia. There is a policy sort of government policy sort of thought behind that, and it goes into the FIRB approval as well, is that what they do is increase the amount of housing stock in Australia. So they are happy for people to invest to increase that stock. What they're not happy with is you buy it and you reduce the housing stock available to people within the country to buy a home. And that's just a government policy. And whether we like it or not, that's just the policy. So I think every country in the world will have some sort of policy regarding housing around the world. Housing costs are one of the main factors for basic living. So in Australia, they say, yep, we see lots of we want lots of development, but we also don't want to reduce the housing stock for local people, whether they're citizens or permanent residents or even temporary residents like students. So they do want to allow enough housing being available for people in the country.
And that sort of policy will keep changing, isn't it? Especially like now that we're in that situation. So for all our foreign investors out there, so before you sign or when you sign your purchase contract, make sure like what Gabriel mentioned, FIRB approval is a must. So make sure you put a subject to FIRB approval in your contract. Usually when you buy a larger development of the plan, the term will definitely inside because the contract is drafted by the legal team. Just that if you're looking at buying a smaller development or a single houses, maybe sometimes you just need to make sure that you include that term, and also sign that foreign transfer duty declaration form. So it usually is a must, and I think the settlement agent will provide the form, not the real estate agent, isn't it?
Yeah. So we provide form. If you don't complete that form, the from a buyer's point of view,
Yeah.
your contract won't be assessed for transfer duty. Settlement won't take place. So until transfer duty is actually paid, settlement can't take place. So
Yes.
if you refuse to sign it, you're not going to get to settlement. It's as
So
simple as that.
Yeah, that's good. So they will not get penalized. Yeah. And what about ID check? That's probably is a less of a problem now. In the last 24 months with, the border closure and the pandemic and everything, and a lot of our buyers are not able to fly in to do their ID check in person. Is there any new updates in changes in terms of how foreigner can do their ID, in-person check overseas?
Yeah. So the prior to COVID, foreign or people in foreign countries would sometimes have to go to the embassy or consulate to sign the documents and have their identity verified in that place, or they would come to Australia and have it verified by their settlement agent. Going back one step, these identity checks, verification of identity checks, came in probably about 10 years ago. There were some frauds where someone would sign for a seller. The seller would be away on holiday. They'd come back and suddenly find that their house had been sold. And it happened twice. And since then, they brought in these identity checks. Originally, it was just for sellers, but nowadays it's for buyers and sellers. So everyone has to be verified. The way that it has been taking place in more recent times is by online services, which some of them will take live video, they will provide scanned documents, they will hold the documents in front of a webcam or a phone. Some of the more sophisticated ones I know even can check for Australian passports. They can be linked to secure systems which can actually check the passport numbers. So it's something that it's not just foreign buyers, local buyers, anyone buying or selling now has to complete it, especially, in the more modern world, we are all moving towards online-based transactions. And I think this is just a progression. Cybercrime, we don't want that to happen. We don't want people to steal our ID. We certainly don't want people selling our houses when we go on holiday. So yes, it's very annoying, but it's also probably quite necessary to try to reduce fraud taking place for land transactions. They're usually the most expensive transactions people participate in. Car might be tens of thousands, let's call it hundreds of thousands. Property in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So it's probably something that, yes, is a bit cumbersome, a bit annoying, but at the end of the day, it's to ensure that the system works and we can rely on the system so that we are buying and the people who are selling, it's not being sold from under them.
I know it's a must. It's a must. Yeah, just to be sure and secure. You mentioned Gabriel just then about everything is really moving into that digital world. So I guess the next question you probably can guess what I'm going to ask is about the tax betterment. So I'm sure a lot of people have done PAXA settlement in the last couple of years. Is there a huge difference between the paper settlement and PAXA settlement?
From a customer's point of view or a client's point of view, it probably makes little difference to them. It's actually it's a quicker system because a paper settlement would ordinarily require the transfer of land. So the document that is actually transferring the land from the seller to the buyer to be signed, wet signature, so not a scanned document, a wet signature document sent to wherever this person is in the world. They will have to sign it. It will need to be witnessed. And in the old days, it had, well, not the old days, but it has to be witnessed basically by a consulate or embassy. The document has to come back to the buyer's settlement agent. The buyer's settlement agent has to give it to the seller's settlement agent, who then has to give it to the seller to sign. Now, if that seller's overseas, that document's now going overseas to be signed again. Same process, and then it's coming back to Australia, so it can be a paper settlement can take place. A paper settlement is basically a document which says called a transfer of land, which is handed over at settlement along with what they used to have a paper title, and a bank check was handed to the seller in exchange for those other documents. In a PEXA settlement, in an electronic settlement, that doesn't actually happen anymore. Basically, each side will authorise their settlement agent to act for them on the PEXA platform. That's the only one at the moment. I think another one is coming on board, but it's another electronic exchange, basically, or platform to transact. And it will be essentially dealt with by the settlement agent, who will then see it essentially live on their screen when things are taking place. Is the bank ready? Are the settlement agents ready? Are the amounts of money, are they all correct? When they're all correct, everything lines up on the day that settlement takes place. The system will just go through. Eventually, you'll see these little messages on the screen saying, yes, it's been processed, it's finished, money is transmitted electronically. So the system is, from that perspective, is a lot safer, and people who are newer in the industry than I am definitely prefer electronic settlement. They do not like paper settlements. They can see that the property's been transferred, and it's transferred, you can see instantaneously on the title once it's through. If you do a paper settlement, someone at the titles office has to actually process that, and it'll take depending on the type of paper settlement, it can take 70 plus business days for that to occur before it's actually processed. Business days, not consecutive days, business days. That's 3 months.
Really long.
Before that's finished. So it can take a long time in a paper-based settlement. So if you can use an electronic settlement, it's a lot faster. The whole thing moves a lot smoother. There are ups and downs with it, but on the whole, I think most settlements now take place by PEXA settlement.
Yeah, it's so much more time efficient. And I remember one of my clients just recently settled, and then the moment it's gone through, she got the text messages, or I think she probably was looking at the screen. The second that it gone through, a message popped up. So she was so excited, like she get to know the answer immediately, basically. And especially in the new world that we live in, everything has to be fast. So I think it is a good thing to have. And is are we actually still using the paper settlement, or that is completely sort of not something that we will use anymore?
No, the paper-based, because not every transaction is capable of being transacted on the electronic system. The list is growing. At the very beginning, I think the only things that could be transacted on there were discharges of mortgage. Like that was the only document you could use on the electronic system. And over the years, more and more things can come. I would say almost probably 90% of normal, let's call them normal settlements, can take place via PEXA. There's certain ones that can't, and they're not really sales that you might be involved in, but where there are family court orders, so spouses are transferring and they're pursuant to some sort of court order, those can't happen on the PEXA system. If an individual person is doing their own settlement, I'd say it's not going to happen by PEXA because they're not registered in the system, so they're not able to use that system. So that might be a reason to use a settlement agent, especially if you're overseas. If you're overseas and you're trying to do a paper-based settlement, who's going to turn up for you? Who's going to do those things? It would be very difficult. So there's probably, if there's a memorial on the land, So memorial on the land is usually where there's some outstanding land tax. If that's got to be removed, you won't transact on PEXA. I did make a little list of other items which I'm going to refer to now. Where there might, some transactions which have a foreign duty requirement can get caught up and require a paper-based settlement. Deceased estate transfers, they can require paper-based settlement if parties are self-represented. So I would say, mortgagee sale. So if you're buying from a bank, so the bank is selling it, you can't do that on PEXA. And those are probably the main items. But by and large, most of these, if you're selling off the plan, I would say a lot of these are going to be able to be transacted using the PEXA system. So paper does exist, and you should be aware that in some circumstances you may need to transact that way. But for most people, they will be able to use the PEXA system.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, which is really now. I think most of our settlement are gone through PEXA. So it's only one or two, the odd one that is still going through paper. But I guess eventually that will slowly fading out as well. Now, the other question will be GST withholding at settlement. That is also something kind of new-ish, not so new anymore, I guess, that is being introduced. Yeah. So, and under what circumstance that people will have to do GST withholding, or when do we actually have to pay GST?
So GST, for those who don't know, is goods and services tax. It generally comes around when there's brand new properties being developed and sold, and the buyer actually, to make sure that it gets paid, actually remits or pays that part of the GST to the tax office. So they'll fill out a form in that settlement. The part of GST, which is usually 1/11 or I think 7%, gets, if they're using the margin scheme, gets sent to the ATO, so the Australian Tax Office. So
can't run away with that GST.
Yeah, we can't get away from it. It's important, therefore, if you are buying new property, to know whether the purchase price includes GST or is exclusive of GST, and you've got to add that on, and that has to be paid out. It doesn't go to the seller; it actually goes to the government. So that's pretty common. I don't think it's a critical matter for most people, because most of the time that is dealt with fairly well in the contract, and people generally know that. But if you're buying, especially brand new, new developments, that can sometimes be an issue. But usually, and I think over time it's become, as agents become more aware and people become more sophisticated, they're aware that this thing is there, and it generally doesn't cause a problem at settlement, because it's sort of known right at the beginning. GST is going to be payable.
It's basically just part of the process now. Is I think people are slowly getting used to it. When it first introduced, a lot of people unsure and then not sure whether seller need to give them the certificate or things like that. But I think it's there. Everyone just understand the process so much more. So
we all become more aware of it. We're alive to the issue, and we know if we're the buyer, hey, seller, we need a tax invoice so we can pay GST and remit it to the government. We're not giving you the extra 10%. We'll pay that to the government. And once and if everyone is aware of it, it's not an issue. We're all aware of it. We know it's got to be paid. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, correct. And to all our audience out there, usually, so far I would say like 99%, when you go ahead and buy a brand new properties, the GST is included. I haven't actually seen any developer or seller will say, this is my purchase price, but you need to plus GST on top of it. So, but it's a good point that Gabriel point out, just probably to ask that question, just make sure that you don't get trapped. But usually so far, I think everyone is doing the right thing by including the GST inside, so you don't need to.
If it says includes GST or excludes GST, at least you can see straight on the face of the contract how they've calculated that purchase price.
That's good to know. Yeah, we briefly mentioned about the off plan just then, and yeah, we almost finished, Gabriel. Don't worry.
Oh, that's
Just quick,
quite all right. Keep
yeah.
asking questions.
So many questions, isn't it? Yeah. Even though the settlement will happen much later in the stage, so sometimes 2 to 3 years before the settlement happen,
Yes.
will the buyer still need to engage a settlement agent at that time?
I would say the sooner they engage, and it might be before settlement if they're used to dealing with them, because they might engage them to just make sure, hey, finance approval. So there's those things. If you wait too long, some settlement agents may not touch it. Off the plan, I would say you need to engage the settlement agent, because the contract, when you enter the contract has to be lodged with the Office of State Revenue within 2 months of you entering into the contract. So that could be years before the building is actually finished, but your obligation to lodge is actually quite early on. So unless you're comfortable with lodging it yourself, then that is a trap. And if you don't lodge it in time, there's potential penalties from the Office of State Revenue for late lodgement.
Yeah.
Now, depending on how late it is, will reflect whether there is a penalty tax added on of the duty that you have to pay. So if you don't lodge it, I think in the worst case where they think you're trying to evade transfer duty, it can be up to 100% of the duty. So you pay the duty and then you pay exactly the same as the penalty. That's your worst case scenario. So that would be a terrible scenario if you don't lodge it or pay it, right? So you want to lodge it within the time so you don't get any penalties. After that, paying the duty depends. It's usually 1 month after the assessment from the Office of State Revenue issues. It's usually before settlement, or is before settlement, or up to 3 years from the date you've lodged. So it can depend, but it will happen before settlement that you're going to have to pay. So you have to pay your duty to get the piece of land.
You don't get anything if you don't pay anything.
Yeah, the government definitely is aware of when it should get the transfer duty from you if you're the buyer.
Yeah. So in summary, even though the transaction or the settlement will not happen too much later, so our audience, if you buy off the plan, it's still very important to engage a settlement agent early on, because there's still things need to be done at the very early on stage, which is, for example, the stamp duty lodgement that has to happen and go, within that 2 months time frame. Yeah. So yes,
Maybe just to cover that point off, if the settlement, let's say it doesn't get constructed, or there's some issue in there, no finance approval or whatever, you can cancel the contract, and if you've paid duty, it can be refunded, or no duty is actually required to be paid. So yes, you've got to lodge it, they will assess it, but if something happens, it doesn't get constructed, no titles are ever issued, you can get either a refund or a reassessment, or it's just cancelled, depending on the situation.
Yeah, but that's very good to know. So yeah. Yes, that's pretty much all the questions that I have for you this evening. Is
That's
there any
okay. If you've got more, you can feel free to ask.
I'm sure we'll have more, and I didn't manage to check all the messages, but if anyone have any question, please feel free to leave a comment in the chat room, and then we will get back to you. So don't worry if we don't manage to answer all your questions today, but we will come back to you. Also, best you can actually email us if you have any specific question. We can link you up with Tang Law or Gabriel. And if you want to engage Tang Law services in terms of settlement, or even just for legal advice for other things, set up trust, set up anything, drop us an email, and then we'll pass your contact detail to Gabriel, and then he will look after you guys. Yeah.
Certainly happy to help and answer questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Before I wrap up the evening, is there anything else that you would like to add on, Gabriel?
No, I think the main thing is if you're not comfortable in doing it yourself, you don't know what the process is, you should engage a settlement agent or seek legal advice as early as possible. You know, just make sure you fully understand it. If you've signed it, it might be too late. WA is different to other states. We don't actually have a cooling off period.
Yes.
People in the eastern states often may not understand that, and they think they've signed it and they've got, you know, I think it might be a week in which they can change their mind and get out. WA doesn't have it, so it's probably even more critical to make sure you're comfortable with that contract when you sign it, because if you change your mind, you may not necessarily be able to withdraw from the contract.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point that you just brought up, Gabriel. Yeah, no cooling off period. So do all the due diligence that you need before you commit. And yeah, also use the settlement agent service. They do so much more behind the scene that we don't know. And it's worth paying that small amount of money compared to the amount of money that you're going to put into your property. So don't save a couple $100 or $1,000 doing all the hard work and then didn't do it correctly. So please engage a settlement agent for your work. Now, before I close off the evening, I just want to do a quick advertisement. I would like to invite everyone, if you have time, come down and join us next weekend, the 24th and the 25th of September. We are going to attend the Property and Education Expo at Perth Convention and Exhibition Center. So come by to visit us. And other than IQI, there will be other agency out there as well that, you know, showcasing many different things, mostly properties and education, of course. And yeah, Gabriel, will you guys be there as well? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely try to make it on the 24th and hopefully see you there.
No, I was wondering whether you have a booth there as well.
No, we don't.
Okay, but you're very welcome to swing by. And then, yeah, I think on that day, we are going to give out some other flyers on the services that or people that we work with. Because buying property is a huge journey, not only a sales, you have to look at a lot of other things like settlement agent and your depreciation report and building inspection, that sort of thing. So come down and say hi. When you walk into the center, you will definitely see us. You can't miss us. We are right at the front. Come and have fun. And if you can just come and win one of these IQI, you can't really see, a cushion. We have this GK cushion to be won. Yeah. All right. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. And thank you so much, Gabriel, for your input and sharing of your experience with us this evening. If we have any extra question, we will email that across to you. Yeah. And hope everyone has a great evening and a great weekend. Thank you and bye-bye. Have a great evening.